Welcome to Stay Sharp with Razorleaf, your secret weapon to all things digital in manufacturing. In today's episode, Jonathan Scott and Jen Ferello explore business systems every manufacturer needs. Using a model of how a product is made in an organization, they stir up the acronym soup of business systems, from ERP to CRM to PLM, and discuss it one spoonful at a time. Thanks for joining us, and here's Jen and Jonathan.
So, welcome back to Stay Sharp. I am Jen Ferello, and I'm joined today by my colleague, Jonathan Scott, and we're happy to be here talking with you about all things digital. Today, we're laying the groundwork. There are a lot of different business systems out there, a lot of three-letter acronyms. God knows I can't keep track of them anymore. PLM plays a large role, and certainly it's a key technology in digital manufacturing, but it's not the only digital business platform that manufacturers rely on. So we're going to go through a lot of different steps, a lot of different processes, and the tools that you use in those processes. So, Jonathan, if we start off with the very basics, give us some context. What kind of organizations are we talking about here?
Yeah, that's a great place to start, Jen. And I think this is a great topic. Like you mentioned, we think a lot about product-related things, but thinking about the whole process is important. And when I think of the prototypical company or organization, I think about somebody who makes, widgets, lots and lots of widgets. They sell them out in the market, and I think it's important to differentiate as we're jumping into this from other types of people or groups or companies or whatever that might make things, right? It's like we're not talking about craftsmen or people who are creative artists and things like that. I mean, there are lots of folks who make, but in this case, I think we're talking about folks who make some widget, and maybe they make hundreds of them, maybe they make thousands or millions of them, and they sell them out in the marketplace. And we could probably get off track here talking about different business models and different operating models, engineer to order and all those kinds of things. So maybe to keep it simple, we should focus on just that. Somebody's making, thousands or millions of widgets and selling them out in the market. And, every couple months or year, they make a new one, a new model of their product. And, that's kind of how they do business. They sell it, they make money, and then they make a new product, and then they do the same lather, rinse, repeat kind of thing. That seems like a good place to go.
I agree. That's what our listeners are doing, basically. That's where they're coming to listen to this podcast. You had mentioned rinse and repeat. It basically, that implies a process of sorts, a circular process, in fact. Is that the same regardless of what you're manufacturing?
Yeah, I think that's a fair question. And I'm sure anybody out there listening who's in an organization who does something like this would say, well, not exactly the same. But I think there are a couple of steps that you would say, like you mentioned, sort of in a cycle, that a company like what we mentioned would do, right? They would need to come up with the idea for their product. They would need to develop that and have a design for that product. They would need to manufacture or build it. They would need to market it and sell it, take orders for it. And that, of course, relates to that manufacturing piece. And, we can get into a chicken and the egg conversation there. And then, once they've made the sales, they have the orders, they need to deliver. And then once they've delivered it, again, depends on what the widget is. But this is where you may connect back to the beginning of the cycle again. That, either you've got service to do or upgrades or replacements or warranty or whatever it might be. But you could quickly get back to, well, that gives me an idea for a new product or improving the product. And we go back to the beginning of the cycle. So I think you're right. It's definitely cyclical.
Yeah, and I think you made a good point that it's not necessarily, even though it's cyclical, it's not necessarily a serial process, right? It's not that you do ideation and definition and then you start design and development and then you do manufacturing, because it's a lot of those things happen in parallel.
Yeah, exactly, right. And depending on the market you're in, maybe you're selling before you manufacture. So you're trying to figure out, well, how many did we sell? That tells me how many we need to make. Or maybe it's the reverse. You're making 1 million and hoping you can sell them all. So yeah, to your point, I think it makes sense to go through this in order, but it's important to acknowledge that it's not entirely serial.
Right. So if everybody that's creating a product, that's manufacturing a product, is going through the same basic process or same basic steps, that's probably a good way to kind of guide our discussion then today, as far as, okay, let's go through kind of each step and say, okay, what are the business systems you're using or utilizing within each step? And careful about the acronyms. you can't assume everybody knows what an acronym is. So
no, it's going to be awesome. Let's dig into alphabet soup. That's how it is with the acronyms. But yeah, that makes sense, Jen. And I think another maybe important thing for us to keep in mind as we're talking through this is we are talking about business systems, because we could easily get off into the weeds talking about all the software tools that you might use during these steps. So maybe we'll mention a few, but yeah, we got to be careful not to get too deep into that as we're talking about the process. So if we think about the overall systems that help a business run in these, let's go back to that first one, ideation. Start with the what. What are we making? What's the product? So what's the idea that somebody has? And I think that can come from a number of places. It can come from market research. So somebody just going out and saying, how do I build a better mousetrap? People need mousetraps. What does that look like? You could collect that information a number of different ways. I think there's a bunch of business systems that could be involved there for companies that have CRM or, to your point, customer relationship management, acknowledging the acronym there. You may have data that you can mine that tells you something about your target customer or those demographics, what they're looking for. But however you collect it, whether it's social media you're looking at or focus groups or whatnot, you need requirements. And I'd say that to me is where we're starting. How you get those requirements could come a number of ways, but you need to understand what are the requirements that you're targeting with this product idea. And I think one of the systems that comes right to mind is PLM. So product lifecycle management is a system where you're going to manage everything about the product throughout its life. And its first, the birthing of that product is with the idea for it coming from the requirements. Why do we need this thing? Does it need to be handheld? Does it need to weigh a certain amount, cost under a certain amount, whatever it might be? Those kinds of requirements you need to define and share and change even. That's another important part, because they might change as you're working on your product idea. But I think that to me is where things start. And you're going to maybe have some CRM and some PLM in there, but I think those are the business systems that are going to be primarily involved when we're at that first stage.
Certainly, it's within ideation and definition, I agree. I think where you really start seeing an expansion of the type of systems you're using is once you start getting into design and development. Take us through what are some of the systems that you use for that stage?
Yeah, I think when it's time to come up with a product concept, and this is where, like we mentioned earlier, it's a blurry line between these steps and these processes. They feed one into another. So in a system like PLM, where you might have some requirements, you might also have some early product concepts. So perhaps you're working up a system architecture. Perhaps you are doing an industrial design because it's, your widget is something that consumers want. It needs to look cool. So, you want to give people an idea what the shape might be and how they might merchandise it or something like that. So I think you're still in a PLM environment for capturing a lot of that information about the product. So that's the system that's maybe helping you kind of flow that information along. And you're using tools. I said we shouldn't get too far into the weeds here, but you're using CAD tools a lot. You're using industrial design tools, shaping tools, maybe even systems engineering tools if you're designing an architecture or things that you want to know, like, is this even feasible, my product idea? Because at that early stage, you may be running through lots of prototypes. And I think other things you may be doing, you're probably trying to validate that the concept is right, is feasible. That could involve a lot of simulation. Today, plenty of people still make prototypes, physical prototypes, to say, hey, is that good? Does it look right? Does it, is it going to hold in my hand weird? But more and more, since we're trying to talk about digital here, right? People want to do those digital prototypes, and that's about simulation. So another business system that can come into play here is simulation product data management, SPDM, or some people call it simulation lifecycle management, or there's probably, I don't know if there's a standard acronym for that one yet, but managing simulation data and using early designs to iterate, to optimize, to try and help with that development process. I think those are the kinds of systems that you're spending a lot of time with at this stage.
Well, and I think another one that I don't know that you did mention yet, but that I'm sure a lot of our listeners are, is you are creating a lot of data, particularly a lot of CAD data in that step. And it's managing that data. I think that's where a lot of current PLM users started with PDM. So product data management.
No, that's exactly right, Jen. I fully agree. We shouldn't leave product data management out when we talk about PLM, because some people may not use PLM, but they do use PDM. So I don't know. That's probably a debate for another day, what all the differences are there. But it's good to mention them both, because you're right. It's a critical system or function within a system at this stage.
So, okay, we've gone through this. We had a great idea. We've captured the requirements. We've got the product itself designed. We've done some simulation. We're going to start creating it. So at this point, it's a little bit less about the what, and we're moving on to the how. How are we going to create this? And there's a lot of different systems that come in there, right? Because it's not just, are we going to create it? Maybe somebody else is going to create parts of it. So, take us through that. Like, what does that look like? What does the manufacturing piece of it, what systems are in there?
Absolutely. And this can, like we talked about a minute ago, can go back and influence the design and development part too, right? Because depending on what kind of widget you're making and what your mode is for making it, do you make all the parts or do you buy some of the parts? And if you buy some of the parts, do you have to think about what's available on the market at the right cost and all those kinds of things? But let's just, let's dig into them. And this is not necessarily in any particular order, but let's take that first example. Let's say that the widget you're making is really a combination of a lot of off-the-shelf parts that you buy and put together in a unique way. And maybe there's some pieces you make that are the secret sauce too. Well, a system like SCM, supply chain management, might be invaluable to you because you need to do a lot of thinking about sourcing parts. Can you get the quantities you need and the timelines that you need at the price point that you need so that your product can still be profitable at the end? That brings into question something that maybe we did back during design and development, which were, pricing studies, costing studies on the product. Could we get it at the cost point and the price point that we think we could even sell in the market? So SCM could be feeding a lot of good information, even into an earlier stage, but certainly it's important at the manufacturing step. Now, I think there are other things we want to think about too. If there are components that we're buying and even components that we're building, we need to think about how those made parts get made. Are we outsourcing those to someone else, specific to our design, or are we making them ourselves internally? Well, there are two systems that I think really need to come in mind there. One is a QMS system, quality management. So we need to make sure that these parts being made live up to the specs that we defined back during design and development. Is it the right tolerance, and does it stay the right color, and will it stand up to the right temperatures and all those things? And QMS could be for components that we're buying from a supplier, could be for the ones that we're making internally or that we're having a supplier make to our spec. But in all those cases, we need to make sure they're the right things before we put them together. And so another system that's kind of hand in hand there is MES, Manufacturing Execution System. And some people will talk about the superset of MES as MOM, or Manufacturing Operations Management, without getting into all the details about how those might be different. But the idea that you need to manage how the product comes together and plan that in the right steps. And of course, more complex products that require a lot of assembly and a lot of components, this is an even bigger deal. But you'll be using other tools to define the process plan. What are the steps, with what tools, what equipment, at what stage, at what work cell, all of that sort of thing. And then you need to manage it as it happens and deal with the exceptions as they happen. So the QMS and MES pieces can be kind of hand in hand, but that's a lot of how are you going to make the product. I don't think that covers it entirely, right? There are a few other systems that we absolutely got to talk about here. And stop me if I'm prattling on, Jen, but I think we've got to dig into ERP for a minute, right? I mean, we talked about how to figure out what components you want to buy, but an ERP, or enterprise resource planning system, is going to have your financial systems in it, finance and accounting and shipping and receiving, and lots of things. Depends on the ERP you have and how you put it together, but those are absolutely essential pieces in this manufacturing step, because you have to buy those components we talked about finding through SCM or managing agreements with suppliers, that kind of thing. But you actually have to make the purchase orders and receive the goods, and then that gets us back to QMS and inspecting the goods to make sure that they're fine. Or buying the raw materials so that you can make the parts in-house, that kind of thing. But ERP is going to help orchestrate those kinds of things for you. If you've got warehousing you need to do, shipping and receiving, like I mentioned, those are important functions there. And if we've got all of that kind of sorted out, right? We know what the recipe is for the product that we're going to make, and we've got all the right materials and ingredients, for baking our recipe of our product. We still have to decide how many, cupcakes we're going to make today. And that's where MRP.
No. Cupcakes clearly is not a digitally manufactured product.
No, definitely not. Well, I don't know. We say that, but if somebody's listening to this, if they make cupcakes and they use digital tools to make them, please send us some.
Well, that's true too. And right after you started saying that, I'm like, you can print food additive manufacturing.
Exactly right.
So I could be, I misspoke.
And that's a great one. We didn't even talk about additive, right? So where does additive fit into all this? I think that, you're still thinking about a lot of the same business systems, but instead of thinking about tools that help you, create G code for CNC and things like that, you're thinking about tools that help you do 3D printing. But those are going to fit into some of these same systems where it relates to MES and getting the components made, and QMS, and did it print, or was there spring back or things like that, and likewise, what about MRP? What machines do we run? What assembly lines, product lines do we run at what time with what materials, and how does everything need to come together so that I can have the right throughput and deliver the finished good at the right time to meet my orders? Right. So MRP and the scheduling activity and that whole piece is an important part. Right. And it actually calls into the conversation another really important piece that we haven't spent enough time on, and that's people.
Right.
Here we are, a bunch of engineers. We like talking about things and products. Oh, people, right. People. Yeah. But when we think about manufacturing, there are a lot of folks involved in the design, the ideation steps also, but we can't forget that MRP really reminds us that when you go to schedule the work and build the product, you have to think about how people fit into it too. And the MES and the QMS also, are people trained? Do they have the right work instructions and steps in front of them to put things together? QMS, do they know what to inspect? All those kinds of things. So yeah, that's a good one to have thought about there.
So you would say that most of that is captured then, those type functions are captured in MRP?
Well, which ones? Which ones are you thinking of?
The people aspects of things.
No. I don't think that's necessarily fair. I mean, I think MRP is helping us think about how people fit into the equation. What is the tack time or cycle time on building something at a particular workstation? And so, labor, I think, factors into it, and it's certainly a relevant input. But I think there are probably lots of these systems are thinking about the people and how long a step takes, and where are people, needed in the process, and how do you capture their time as they're working on the product and building it. Time tracking systems, that's probably one we haven't talked about. That could be an ERP function or MES function, any number of places. But I don't necessarily think of MRP, though, as being a hugely people-focused tool, though.
Right. That's true. And I guess, one thing that we should make an observation of is that a lot of these different functions can be split across some of these systems.
Right.
So, some people do, like you were talking about PDM versus PLM. Some people do most of their data management just in PDM. Some do it as part of their PLM system. And I think there are, as we're growing from specific systems to much larger super systems, platforms, if you will, I think that you're seeing more and more of that growth and sharing of different modules. So an ERP might have a particular SCM module versus, a separate whole system.
I think you're exactly right. That's one of the things that makes it challenging and easier at the same time. On one hand, you can maybe buy one or two software platforms and have everything you need, but is it best for what you need in your business, or do you still want some kind of best of breed approach? But now if you want a best of breed approach for all these systems and buy the, best in class for what you need to do, well, now you've got to tie together these big monolithic systems, but only use certain modules from each one. So, yeah.
That sounds like a whole podcast all on its own.
Yeah, it probably is.
The difference between monolithic and best in class and which way to go.
No doubt.
Okay, so we've got our product. It's created. It's quality. It's in boxes. We've shipped it out to customers.
Yeah.
Actually, I guess I jumped a step there, right?
I think so.
So we've got to do marketing and sales. Again, I guess we're back to CRM.
I think that's right.
For a lot of
but it's, this is another fuzzy one where, is this happening in parallel? Well, maybe. right? Maybe.
Sure, it absolutely has to be.
Yeah, it could be that we were marketing it well before we ever made these finished goods and selling it before we made them. And so our manufacturing was demand driven. Oh, we sold 1,000 units. You better make 1,000 next month. Or it could have been the reverse. It could have been, well, we've been marketing it forever just to build demand out on the market. But at the end of the day, we're going to make 1 million of them and we're going to send them out to distributors or retailers, and they're going to sell them until they're gone, hopefully. And if we have to make another batch later, we will, or we won't, but these could be coupled in any number of ways. But it's good. It's important to talk about them now, right? Because if we've got a bunch of finished goods, we sure want to get them sold.
We definitely want to get them out of the warehouse.
That's right. So I think CRM comes back into focus here, to your point. And maybe even your corporate website or e-commerce sites. There are probably some web systems that come into play here these days, selling your products digitally. But you need to focus on who are your customers, perhaps who are your distributors, your retailers, your partners. That could be part of what you're dealing with in customer relationship management, because you're really just thinking about how do you get the product in the hands of the people who need it, and what is their feedback? What are they, saying about it? So it comes back to things that we mentioned early on in ideation. You might be collecting some of that information while you're selling to feed other parts of your process. But certainly to get things sold, you'll want to think about CRM. And you can't ignore the ERP that we brought up earlier also, because it's that transactional system again. So if you're going to take orders and ship product, and you're going to receive money when the product is received, that finance and accounting has to come back in. So I think in the selling process, ERP is going to be another important business system too. I'm sure we're forgetting something, but I think those are big things in marketing and sales.
Those are the big things for sure. But then you mentioned something there as far as like CRM capturing customer feedback, et cetera. I think post-sale, there are some additional systems that, there's so much data capture being done in pretty much not every aspect, but like in so many different products, Internet of Things.
Yeah.
So IoT for sure comes into play there.
That's right.
And once you've got something out in the marketplace and being used, it may break.
Yeah.
So, what are some of the, or you want to at least get the feedback and make improvements. So what are some of the systems that come in to play after the sale?
Yeah, I think that this can certainly vary by the product we're talking about, industry, that kind of thing. So, back to our widgets, we're selling 1 million widgets a year. Maybe when you're done, you throw them away. That's not great. It'd be better if you could recycle them, but maybe you throw them away and there's nothing else to think about. Well, there's always something to think about, to your point. What did customers think of it? What was their feedback that might go back into the next product generation? But let's say it's not the millions and it's the thousands, or maybe it even is still millions, but people want to repair it or they want to upgrade it, like you said. You have to have some way of dealing with that customer feedback. Maybe that's back in the CRM system or some other systems that, track warranty calls or defects or whatever it might be. Do you then deal with that in some way that ties you back into your cycle, right? Perhaps some kind of repair process. Does that get you back into design and development, where you're designing and developing the repair kit or the upgrade kit or whatever it might be, and there's some sales around that, or it's just warranty, so this could loop back on some of the other steps we've talked about already, but it can go in some other directions too, where maybe there's some new business systems we haven't talked about that are relevant. You mentioned IoT. I don't know that that's a business system, but these days, it's something. I mean, it's not just a standalone application. It's something that needs to be dealt with. So monitoring systems, I couldn't tell you exactly what, 3-letter acronym is supposed to represent those, but getting that IoT data, collecting it and making it actionable so that you know what to do. Is the product phoning home because it's broken, because it needs an update, because it needs a repair, any of those things. But here post-sales that you need to deal with, there are systems that you need to consider there. And are they likely to need to tie into some of your other systems so to take action? Yeah, I think there's something there. This could tie into another existing system that a lot of people would think about here, which is MRO, maintenance, repair, and overhaul. So when your product is large capital equipment, big stuff that has a long life that likely needs to be repaired or maintained because you don't want to buy another one, there are MRO systems to help manage that process of the equipment coming back in for maintenance, for being maintained, or being maintained in the field, for equipment coming back in to be repaired or to be overhauled and resold even. Those are all activities that some businesses find very important. And it's critical they do that after the sale. And it generates more sales, which is also awesome. So those are a couple that I think of when I think about, post-sales, what needs to happen. And it ties back to the beginning of our cycle. Everything you learn on that IoT side, on that MRO side, on the warranty and customer complaint side,
it all
of
feeds
that,
back in, doesn't it?
Yeah, it should feed right back to requirements, or maybe even design and development. Are we changing the existing product, maybe through engineering change, things like that? Or are we coming up with new requirements, new ideas for a new product or a new product generation? But I think that's how those can tie back into the cycle.
What started out sounding like a very simple, 5 or 6 step process really got complex pretty quickly.
It did.
There's a lot of systems we're talking about here. Do we need all of these systems?
Oh, that's a great question. I think you could do it all in Excel. I think that's all you really need. That's the business system, right?
It is. If you have to have one, that would be the one.
It's true.
And I'd probably be horrified to find out just how many people are still doing big sections of this in Excel. And you're right. I mean, just because you can do it doesn't mean that you should.
That's right. I think that's actually a good point. We would be remiss not to mention Excel as one of the key business systems that people need to get their products done digitally. It's ridiculous. They shouldn't, but it happens, right?
It does touch on a lot of different areas.
I think it's we're laughing at it, and it's good to poke a little fun at it, but recognize the reality of it. It's one of the reasons why I'll poke at it and say it's not great is it's missing an ability to really connect these processes. A lot of the systems we talk about have an ability to tie together. That's one of the things that I think differentiates organizations that are struggling to grow and scale and that kind of thing from ones that are having some luck with that, is they're able to tie these processes together and connect them by connecting these business systems. And, that's where we get into fun topics like digital thread, right? How do you...
I was going to say, are you talking about the digital thread?
Shame on me. But it's the what makes me bring it up is that's where Excel really falls down, right? Excel represents breaks in the digital thread, right? Because it's not a system. You can't easily tie data together across Excel worksheets. You can, but don't ask a technology person that question. Anyway, I digress. I think when you talk about business systems, that's where you can build some good, solid digital threads. And I'm glad we sort of dug into each of those and how they might be tied together to get the whole end-to-end process done.
Yeah. And I think, even as many as we talked about, there are still like big topics out there that we really didn't touch on. The people one is a big one, human resource systems. But again, this was mostly about manufacturing, just kind of assuming that the people are going to come along.
No, but it's a good point, though. You bring that up. I mean, human resource management systems, I mentioned like training as part of MES, right? It's good to have instructions for people for how they assemble the product, and that's important. But what about how to use this tool, how to calibrate that piece of equipment, how to operate this piece of machinery, all those things? That's another set of systems, and we probably didn't spend enough time talking about people, but human resource management systems, corporate training systems, those kinds of things are important.
Well, and they're certainly all digital now. Most digital work instructions, you've got videos to show you how to do things, assemble, repair things, etc. So it's still all data. So I'm sure it's all still digital. Yeah.
And I think there are probably other things that we didn't maybe mention in the main line of going through that process that maybe are worth calling out. I mean, we talked about a number of functions that are a little bit in the background, the finance and accounting things that make a whole business run that are important. Right. We shouldn't leave those out because, in addition to paying suppliers, we need to pay our people too. It's good. It's good to get a paycheck. I like getting a paycheck. We talked a little bit about, making goods move around, shipping, receiving, warehousing, those kinds of things in the context of ERP. And I think those are all good. One that we didn't dig into is sustainability. ESG systems, environment, sustainability, and governance, right? So when we think about those and overall, how does our process stack up? How does our product stack up? Do we have elements that are recyclable? Are we using post-consumer materials? Those kinds of things. That's an important system because we talked about digital thread earlier. That ties into a bunch of parts of the process that we already covered, right? From the ideation into the design and development, into the manufacturing, and even into the post-sale. So I'm sure there's other stuff we didn't cover, Jen, but I feel like we hit on a bunch.
We did. We definitely hit on a bunch. And it's, the thing that really struck me is how much, and I just mentioned it a little bit ago, how much data is created throughout this process. And really how important managing that data is. It's not, it's not all CAD data, but it's requirements, it's supply chain management. It's like all of these different pieces of data. They need to tie together somehow if you're going to easily grow and scale. So maybe we need to have a what would be that main system that would tie those pieces together?
Nice.
Yeah, we're back to product lifecycle management.
Back to again. PLM. No, I agree. I agree that it's an important system in there to tie all that together. It's also not the only one, right? For sure. With everything we just talked to, I think that highlights that when people say digital thread, they shouldn't think, wasn't that synonymous with PLM, right? I mean, doesn't a PLM system give me a digital thread? Well, sure, it does, right? It ties a bunch of good product data together, but not all of the data about your product, because all those other systems that we named, they feature in there, they factor into decision making around the product. And so, yeah, it's a ton of data, and it's a lot to connect to have the full picture that you need to make good decisions. But there's a lot to think about there.
And now we just need to have a transition out.
Right. Yeah.
All right. So we talked about a lot of different systems today, not just PLM, a lot of different systems and how the data connects to basically create that digital thread. Maybe the next time we'll need to talk a little bit more about specific systems and or how some of that data connects together. I mean, that's how you flow data from one place to another is going to be really critical moving forward.
I think that's exactly right, Jen. That gives us a bunch of other topics that are worth digging into, right? Topics like how are some of these systems different from each other? What's a function within a system, or, debates like PDM versus PLM, and other questions about integration and how do you integrate these systems, and what do you need to integrate? There's a lot of open questions by digging into this, but I think we covered a pretty good topic today, just identifying what some of these systems are, and I'll speak from my own experience. I know when I started in engineering, I didn't understand what half of these systems were or what they did. But as my career moved along and I dealt with decision-making from data in some of these systems, I had to care, right? I learned about them because I had to care about what was coming out of them and how they influenced the product and product development. And I think that's, for me, I'm glad that we talked through this topic today, because it's hard to step away from digital product development and have that big picture. And I think talking through the process and talking through the systems helps give us that.
I agree. I mean, and because everything is so digital and the information can flow, we are in a position as, people that we need to be more aware. We can't just stay in the silos. Oh, I just do CAD. You can't do that anymore. You can't throw things over the wall. So, I'm glad we went through all of this.
Absolutely.
Matter of fact, one thing that I wanted to mention is anybody that's out there listening, we do want your ideas and your questions. Like if you have questions, if there are topics specifically that you would want to cover, let us know. This is not just a conversation between Jonathan and I. This is a much wider conversation than that. So we will be here same time next week. And until then, stay sharp.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you for listening today. We hope you enjoyed this podcast. This is your podcast as much as it is ours, and we welcome your feedback and ideas on what topics you'd like to see our team cover in a future broadcast. Please share your thoughts and questions with us by sending an email to podcast@razorleaf.com, and we will share your comments on a future show. Thanks again, and have a great week. Stay sharp.